Now, wait, let me double check. Let me go back here. Yeah, you have the Divine Economy. That's it. But the Company of Strangers, that's the one that caught my eye first and has 61 reviews. All right. So, all right, three, two, welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. You know, I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book, and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're looking to write a book out there, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. We can help you out with wherever you're at in the process. And if you have a book that's already done, you want to generate leads with it for your business, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. Now, you know, this podcast is really for people who are trying to build their life their way. And that's why our next guest is perfect, because he wrote a book called The Company of Strangers, A Natural History of Economic Life. And we have the author with us today, Paul Seabright. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Thank you, Mike. It's a privilege to be on your show.
Well, you started off before we hit the record button that this book is perfect for those who are trying to launch themselves in the world, and I guess maybe rely upon the strangers around them to do so. So, what made you want to write this book? And if you can give a quick little background on where you come from and what got you to this point, that'd be helpful also.
Okay, so I study economics, and my kids are people who love nature shows, nature documentaries. So they love all those BBC things with, David Attenborough appears in the middle of an ant hill and tells you, you don't understand what these ants are doing, but let me explain it to you. And I wanted to explain to them that understanding how human beings live is a little bit like that. It's actually much stranger than you think. We do really weird things all the time. We go out into a restaurant, we order a pizza, and we don't expect to get clubbed to death for doing so. But, to our ancestors, that's something that would really have bothered them. It was a really violent world out there. And, if you went out just expecting people to be nice to you, you didn't survive. And so every one of us is descended from people who were really, really suspicious of what they found out there. It was a big, bad world. Now, you might think that I'm telling you that to say you shouldn't trust anybody. It's terrible. I'm not. I'm telling you the opposite. I'm saying actually, thousands of times a day, we trust people we've never seen. We have apparently no reason to trust, and we couldn't do anything unless we did. And it's a kind of a miracle as to how we came to do that. That's what the book's about. And I
Awesome.
wanted my kids to understand that this wasn't some sort of dull book about, ways to do particular techniques or accounting or something like that. This was a book about the big adventure of being human. And I think they loved it.
Wow. Yeah. So whenever I first saw this, I thought immediately of a book called Tribes. And I think that's a Seth Godin book. And it made me think about how we're all trying to find our people. And we do so probably naturally because if we were out in the wilderness by ourselves, we were certain to die. And so groupthink mentality spawned because the moment you were kicked out of a tribe back in the day, you were dead. So you would do everything in your power to stay within that tribe, to stay trusted. And I think that carries on in today's world, and it's never going away. So being aware of it does give me an advantage because I will realize I'll check myself if I'm falling into that. Wait a second, am I thinking it? Or is it because I don't want to be banished from the group or from people I respect? So I think that was very relevant in 2020, groupthink mentality on full display. Is that another aspect of this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is about who we can trust. And it's also about how we sometimes make mistakes because we think we know who we can trust. We think we know who are our in tribe. We think we know who are the out tribe. And sometimes we decide that on the basis of funny little things like how somebody dresses or what accent they have, or a few little things which in the past might have been reliable guides to whether they were like us, whether they were trustworthy. But often in the modern world, they're not because people can fake it. People can pretend to be all sorts of things that they're not in order to get you to part with your money, to send them money for nothing, to take part in their ventures which have no chance of succeeding. And we have to be very careful. But the message of being very careful is not don't trust anybody, because as you beautifully put it, out there in the world by ourselves, we're meat. In order to do anything, we have to find people to trust. And again, the message of the book is we have some amazing ways to do that, and we can leverage that in order to be more successful about finding the right partners for our adventures in life.
Beautiful. Can you list out a few of those aspects that would be relevant for our audience? And as I told you before, the average person who listens to this podcast is somebody who's really trying to take control of their life, build their business, increase their financial literacy, find the right people, not to be, controlled in any way. We're all about freedom. So, any takeaways from the book that could be very beneficial for them?
Yeah, so one of the things you have to do, and the book is a lot about that, is you have to figure out not only whether somebody likes you, but whether they have the right incentives to work with you and not against you. So let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, I sold my car on a website. Okay. And you might think, well, this is a weird thing to do. Why would I go to a website I'd never previously heard of and hand over my car to somebody and hope that 2 days later the money would appear in my bank account? I'm not normally given to doing crazy things, so why would I do that? And the answer is complicated because it's partly because I was recommended to the website by somebody I trusted. It's partly because I checked the website out and I knew they had lots of other recommendations. Again, not just from random people who could have been, I don't know, bots, but from people that I had some reason to trust. And then I figured out that they had a showroom in a place where they probably wouldn't set it up if they were, likely to go out of business very soon. So these are not some fly-by-night people. So I figured out they had incentives to behave in a trustworthy fashion. But then I went and I checked out the guy himself, and I spent a long time talking to him. I said, "What's his business like?" And he impressed me because he wasn't all flashy, sort of hand over your car now and you'll see the money in a little while. He was willing to explain to me all of the reasons why he'd gotten into that, why this was a good business model, and so on. And so it was that beautiful combination of figuring out that this was a person who'd thought about things well enough that I could trust him personally, but also that his business was based on a solid set of principles, and his business had no incentive to go around cheating people like me. Now, I could have been wrong. I could have been wrong, but I wasn't. And it all turned out fine. And so I think it's that kind of combination of establishing trust at a personal level by showing people that you are willing to think things through at a level where you're with them, you understand where they're going, you understand them at a human level, but also showing them that your project is based on principles where you have no incentive to cheat them.
Yeah, but what you did was, I mean, you had to like go there. You had to touch the building, right? You had to see the person in person, right? And it's
Yep.
basically you're trying to establish enough clues that there's a switch in your brain that says trustworthy enough, right? You'll never be 100% certain, but at least it clicks over. And something I wrote down while you were talking is that everybody has this checklist in their brain before they hand over a resource or their time or their trust. And it could be length in business, the reason why they got started. Is there social proof built up, right? Are there testimonials? Did a friend use them in the past? And do I trust that friend? And so that's a referral from somebody I trust. So there's automatic credibility built in. And this checklist is different from person to person, but there are many things that are set in stone. Like you said, that you wanted to meet the person if there's no flash to it and there's really a subtle approach by that sales rep or that individual, you look at them and say, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. I see how everything connects, and therefore I'm willing to at least give this person a shot with my car.
You're
Uh,
so
so
right, Mike. It's
so
it's
can
it's personal and it's institutional, and it's the two things together. I mean, let me give you another example. Not so long ago, there's a ring at my doorbell, and I go and I open, and there's a guy standing there I've never seen in my life before, and he says, "Can I come in?" And I say, "Yes." Now, why would I do that? That could be crazy. I do it because he's wearing a uniform, and the uniform is the uniform of a store where from which I just bought a washing machine. Okay. Now, somewhere in my brain is doing a complicated set of things. Okay, the guy could be an axe murderer, but this store is big enough, well enough established that in general, they don't employ people who are axe murderers. It would be really bad for their business if they did. And so it's a little thing. If the guy hadn't been wearing a uniform, I would never have said, come in. I would have said, okay, wait, what's all this about? And there'd have been a long story, and maybe I would have let him in, maybe I wouldn't. But the uniform did the trick. Now, a uniform can be faked. But again, in the checklist in my head, and I think that's a beautiful metaphor you came up with, in that checklist in my head, which was which I was going through so fast I wasn't even aware of it. One of the things I was thinking is um, faking that uniform isn't really in anybody's interest. Too complicated to do. I mean, a real axe murderer would find some other way, but faking that particular uniform doesn't make sense. So I let the guy in, I got my washing machine, and it all ended happily ever after.
Yeah. So, yeah, your brain, like you said, is doing a complicated algorithm, whether you realize it or not. And so, uh, one thing that I made me, was thinking about before you came on this podcast is something I learned from Jordan Peterson about how the evolution of when it comes to the eyes and the white around your eyes, and therefore it does allow you to see someone's intentions without any words or any body language being portrayed, right? So there is something in that where most people will test a person based off of their handshake, the look in their eyes, their posture. Nothing's being spoken, but a lot of communication is being done. So, can you maybe, give us some insight on what is happening and maybe why the white in our eyes is there? Because I realized, maybe doing a little bit of research, it was based off of evolution. People wanted to see the intentions of the animals, the prey, the predators, the people around them.
That's a fantastic example. And I can give you a story that corresponds exactly to that. So every year I show some students a photograph, and it's a photograph of some people in Africa. And it's a quite a grainy photograph. And that graininess is the whole point. Because I say to them what's happening, and they say, well, these people seem to be in some kind of a market. And vaguely they can make out a table and bits of cloth on it. And I say, sure, I mean, you guessed right. I'm an economist. I'm going to talk about markets. That was easy. Now for the difficult bit. Who's buying and who's selling? And they immediately tell me, oh, it's that boy who is selling, and it's those adults who are buying. And so I say to them, well, this is weird. Children, even in Africa, children are not usually the people selling. They do a bit in Africa more than here, but why do you say the children? And it takes them about 10 minutes to figure out why they know that. And the way they know that is exactly because of the whites of the eyes. Because what they can tell is that the adults are looking at what's on the table. The boy isn't looking at what's on the table. He's looking at the adults. Now, that makes sense. And you can tell that, by the way, because of the whites of the eyes. Even in a grainy photograph, from where the whites of the eyes are, you can tell where the eyes are pointed. And so people can tell that he's selling, because if you're selling, you don't need to inspect the merchandise. You know what it is. If you're buying, you have to inspect the merchandise.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you're selling, you want to inspect the buyers to see, how much are they willing to pay. And so from the whites of the eyes, even in a very grainy, low resolution photograph, you can figure out very quickly who's looking at who. And your brain is doing the calculation, who's the buyer and who's the seller in this position, even though you've never done an Econ 101 course in your life. And I think that's just amazing. That shows that we have these brains which are incredibly sophisticated. As you say, they use the whites of the eyes to tell a whole lot of stories about what's the relationship between the different people who are looking at each other. And we do all of that so fast, we don't even know how we do it.
Yeah. I've always said the eyes never lie. And maybe it's because they can't, right? Because you could see, and I've seen people who are corrupt at their soul, and you could see it in their eyes almost. It's just, I don't know, maybe it's just a gut instinct, or maybe I'm trying to tell myself a story. But do you think that's just biologically just inside of us? Like, you can't hide whether it's true feelings or when you're surprised or whether you're excited. It's part of us and you can't escape it.
Well, I think it's a bit more, I think it's a constant um, war between the predators and the prey. If you like, our predators are the people who figured out how to convince us that they're sincere, although they're not. And we are like the prey. And these old things about the populations of foxes and rabbits, and if the rabbits learn to run faster, then the foxes starve, and then there are not enough foxes, and so the rabbits multiply, and then it becomes much easier to catch the rabbits, and then you get more foxes, and the foxes reduce the population of rabbits, and then the foxes start to die, and so in other words, there's never any one of them wins. And I think the same is true of us. We have some very sophisticated mechanisms. Let me tell you about smiling. So with some of my colleagues, we've done research in the lab as to what makes people think that when somebody's smiling at them, they're genuine. Because, you know, we all know about fake smiles. You
Yeah.
know, I can give you a fake smile like
And
that.
when you fake a smile, it doesn't activate parts of your face and it's easy to see, which also turns people off, right?
Exactly. So we can all smile with our mouths. What we can't all do is smile with our eyes. And so, well, you just smile with your eyes. So
Yeah.
either
So
you're a very good fake or you're
no,
genuinely
no,
enjoying this interaction.
I've tried to do the fake. I can't do the fakes, right? So like when you walk by somebody, you know how you
Yeah,
don't do the full smile and you do the fake smile.
exactly.
It's obvious, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, I notice it.
yeah. But notice there are people who can fake the smile. I mean, good politicians can. And so it's like, you know, the fastest running foxes will catch the rabbits. And there's always the equivalent of the fastest running foxes in the population out there. And, you know, they're disproportionately represented among movie stars, among politicians, among, I don't know, pastors, among, you know, people who are out there and whose job publicly is to convince us to trust them. Now, that's not to say that they're not trustworthy, but it also means that we're much more in some sense, at their mercy if they're able to use that ability to fake an honest smile to our detriment. And so, you know, we have become, through millions of years of evolution, better and better at figuring out. You know, our brains can look at the parts at the side of the eyes to tell whether the muscles there are crinkled. So that kind of rules out. I mean, you and I can do that instantly. And that means that say for the 70% of the population who are not good at faking it, we can instantly tell that they're faking it. So that's good. But that leaves 30% who are much harder to spot and much harder to see whether they're being genuine or not. And so it's like a continual war, a predator-prey interaction in which the people who are more skilled at sending apparently trustworthy signals can get us to trust them. And sometimes that's for our good, and sometimes it's not. And, you know, the paradox is it's often the people who have the most to give us who make us most dependent on them and who could therefore most abuse us.
How can somebody listening to this podcast earn someone's trust from a stranger in the fastest possible time frame? And it makes me think of a sales call or a
Yeah.
date that they go on with a potential mate. Uh, Communication skills, eye contact, obviously. You know, posture, but also potentially social media, right? I'm thinking strangers are basing our lives off of what we put out into the world. And Dr. Joe Dispenza has that great quote, your personality creates your personal reality. So the more you show your personality, potentially individuals will be attracted to it or deselect you out of their own life. So how are give us some ways if you can to expedite that.
Okay, but let me I say I agree with everything in that, except when you said do it in the fastest possible time. Because often the way to win people's trust is not to be in too much of a hurry.
Yep.
Okay. If you want to do it
Desperation,
instantly,
right? You're what you're spot on. So desperation usually shines through if you're trying to, whether it's sleep with a girl or a
exactly,
guy or try to get that sale. I don't know what it is. It's in your voice, it's in your tonality, but the language, it pushes people away, right? Because they become defensive. I'm glad you brought that up.
exactly. Yeah. And you know, the other thing is, I mean, if you think about dating, but I think it's equally true of sales. A lot of people, and you know, you have these manuals for how to be successful on a date and how to be successful in sales and so on. And a lot of the manuals imply that it's about what you say and you know how you behave and so on. Very few of them say something else which is really important, which is about what you listen to. You know, if you're going on a date with somebody and you want them to trust you, it's not just about saying things that will impress them. It's also about showing that you care about them. And how do you show you care about them? It's by not talking all the time. It's by listening to what they have to say. Because only if you're really interested in them are you going to give them time to talk to you. And you know, that's one of the most important messages, which none of these dating manuals and very few of these sales manuals ever really tell you. That it's not about just about what you say, though that helps. It's also about how willing you are to listen to them.
Wow. Yeah. It's usually the person who's the most interested is actually the person who's the most interesting, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
curiosity is a superpower. So if you ask a lot of great questions, people look at you as somebody who they actually like to have around. Am I right? So if you're always talking and you're not listening, I think you will be kind of pushed out of the tribe or pushed out of the circle. People don't look at you as much with authority. But those who are in control of the conversation are the ones usually asking questions. And I think if you ask a lot of questions and you do it naturally and honestly, you're curious. And I think people are drawn to that. Am I right?
Absolutely. And you don't need to tell me that, Mike, because you are the one asking the questions. So you understand that. I mean, that's why your podcast is so successful. You're an interesting guy because you're interested in other people. But I think a lot of your listeners need to be reinforced, especially if they're a bit shy, because they may think, oh, how am I going to say something to impress this person? Uh, the answer is you don't have to. Just ask a few questions which show you're interested in them, and everything will flow from that.
Mm, yeah. But I mean, so when it comes to being invited to opportunities, and you're usually being invited to opportunities by strangers, right? So
Yeah.
they know a little bit about you. Hey, you want to come on my podcast, or if you want to, be a speaker at my event, or you want to do this business together. Jordan Peterson has this great quote: life is a series of games. And in order to win lots of games, you need to be invited to play lots of games, right? So the whole invitation process, people are always trying to like barge their way in. You will never be invited to a business opportunity if you are not consistent, if you don't have enough breadcrumbs behind you, if you haven't played well with others, right? If you don't bring value to the table. So I think people listening have to realize that their goal is to maybe showcase as much value to the marketplace in a short window of time in a clear manner. Therefore, others are looking to that person as, oh, that person will add value to my life. And therefore, if that person's a great hunter or a great communicator or a great leader or a great worker, you will add value to my life. So let's get that person on my team. Is
Yeah.
that the case that most people are, analyzing from a day-to-day basis or on a day-to-day basis that, hey, as long as I get invited to play lots of games, I have a chance to actually win?
Yes, but again, I'd add to that list of great hunter, great communicator, and so on, great listener and great team player. Okay. You don't have to come across as the person who has to lead the team in order to be a fantastic member of the team. Okay. And again, a lot of people, especially in a competitive culture like the US, a lot of people focus on, what does it take to be the winner? What does it take to be the leader? Remember that almost all good leaders got there by first being good team members.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, being a leader is great if you can do that consistently. But if you start out only wanting to lead other people and never wanting to work with them and let them shine too, then in the end, people aren't going to want you on your team. And unless you start off by being on somebody's team, you're never going to have a team to lead. So it's all about being patient. Don't get so obsessed with getting to be the leader immediately. Think about um, letting other people shine. Think about being a good team member for them, and then you can get to be a leader. So if you become too obsessed on winning, other people are going to say, "Well, this guy's probably a good winner, but I don't want them working with me because we're going to have to do stuff together. We're going to have to work on a team." And the team is not all about just who scores the most points or who scores the most goals or it's who can contribute to what the team does.
So there's an individual I follow on social media. His name is Dave Portnoy. Do you know who this is at all?
It rings a bell, but I can't remember.
He's the owner of a company called Barstool Sports. And I follow him because he shows a lot of wins. He's funny, right? But he also shows a lot of losses, right? And
Mm.
and and I think there's a lot of people out there who say, well, if we're in order for me to gain respect from people, I need to show that I'm maybe perfect, or I need to show people that I'm flawless, or I'm always going to do the right thing. But I think nowadays with social media, if you show your losses, you gain respect from those around you. People like you more because you're real by showing the downsides, the wrong bets, the wrong business moves. People trust in that more. Is there something that's happening psychologically when individuals kind of open the curtain and maybe show the not so perfect side of them, and therefore maybe uh, gain their trust faster? Is there anything
You're
that's
so
happening
right.
there?
That's exact. You know what I think it's about? I think it's about resilience. Because the point about resilient people is they're not people who are always successful. They're people who fail sometimes and can take it, can digest it, and can bounce back. And actually, that's one of the secrets of the American economy, and one of the reasons why it's so powerful and so innovative is that you have, I think, more effective social mechanisms for dealing, for installing resilience in people, and particularly in entrepreneurs, than many other countries in the world. You know, if you, I mean, it's kind of famous. You fail once, you fail twice, you fail three times, you fail four times, but you can still succeed on the fifth time. And America makes it very easy to start over. Again, let's not exaggerate. Some people find that tough, but compared to many other countries in the world, you can bounce back, and it's about being resilient. And so I think if you want to portray yourself on social media as a person who always wins, that's going to be pretty unlikely. And people are going to say there's something fake about this. But if you say, yes, I've lost, and this is what I've learned from what I've lost, you can portray yourself much more realistically as somebody who's resilient. And resilience is good because, well, for all the obvious reasons that nobody has the dice rolled for them every time, but also because a resilient person's better in a team because they understand and they can empathize with other people in the team who may be struggling. And so people in the team who are struggling are much more willing to trust a resilient person than they are to trust a genius who's always succeeding.
That's good. And so, yeah, if you're out there listening, show your resilience, right? Don't just show all the wins and that you're a genius because that's maybe not duplicatable, but resilience always is. That's why we love the hero's journey. That's why we love movies like Rocky. We envision ourselves in Rocky's shoes, that we take a beating and keep going, and people are inspired by that. Now, one thing that I think is beneficial is the activating maybe comedy in your social media posting or within your communication skills. Something is happening when it comes to being funny in the market. People look at you more favorably, right? And maybe trust is built because you make them laugh. How does that lend favor, or maybe psychologically, what is happening if you can make people laugh? That you automatically add value to their life, or you automatically can win over a tribe? What's happening there?
That's a great question. And I've looked into the evolutionary origins of both smiling and laughter in ways that I think were fascinating to me. So there are various theories about how laughter evolved, but laughter as we really know it is uniquely human. But there are some things a bit like laughter in some other animals, monkeys and apes. And in particular, we see it in a number of monkeys and apes in a very specific situation where they face a real danger. So imagine that, say, monkeys are in the forest and one of them sees an eagle flying overhead, and that's really dangerous to the monkey. And so monkeys have their alarm calls, and the alarm call means, hide, get away from the eagle, it's dangerous, and so on. And we know the alarm call. But what a lot of people don't know is that when the eagle's gone, there's a different call that the monkey makes, which is much more like a laugh. And the laugh is, it's okay. The eagle's gone. The danger's past. And if you think about a lot of jokes are like that. They're about something, I mean, the classic thing, the person you trip on a banana skin, you fall flat on your face, and it's a dangerous moment, and all our responses to danger are activated, but we laugh. Why? Because the person isn't dead. We don't laugh when a person slips on a banana skin and dies. That's not funny. But when somebody slips on a banana skin and then stands up and walks away, that's funny because danger, but now it's okay. And so there's a lot of reason to think that our laughter reflex is activated. That's why a lot of comedy is cruel, because comedy is kind of cruel first and reassuring second.
Wow.
And that's why I think laughter is so good about at creating trust, because it's telling us, yes, there's danger out there, but no, it's okay. And when it's done deftly, the person who can make you laugh makes you feel comfortable. Not because they're telling you a fairy story in which there's no danger out there, but because they're telling you a real cruel story. They've shown you the cruelty, they've shown you the suffering, but it's okay. And that, I think, is a very important insight into why laughter makes us trust people.
Yeah. Hey, if you can make people laugh, you can speed up the trust factor, I think.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm drawn to people who make me laugh. So, just by, increasing your comedic skills, you're going to become more valuable to those around you, the strangers around you. While you were talking, it made me think of another study that was done. You probably are very aware of it. I'm always fascinated with nature versus nurture. And
Mm.
there's a great study about how monkeys were all put in this, whether it's some type of room or some type of environment, and they had a rope up to, I think it was bananas or some type of reward. And anytime a monkey would climb that rope to get the reward, I think it was bananas, they would hit it with a fire hose. And then every time they would hit it with the fire hose, and they would hit other monkeys with the fire hose. So what would happen would be, uh, as time went on, any monkey would try to climb that rope, the other monkeys would say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, don't do that, because every time you do that, we're going to get hit with fire hoses. So don't do it." And one by one, they would take other monkeys out and bring new ones in that never were hit with the fire hose. And they would climb that, and all of a sudden, the monkeys would pull them away. And slowly but surely, they would remove all the monkeys that they first started with that got hit with the fire hose, and have all new monkeys in there that were never hit with the fire hose. And still, the monkeys would say, "Well, we've been trained to pull the monkeys down if they ever try to go for that. So there's got to be a reason for it. We don't know what the reason is, but we've been trained because of our nurture, because of all the people, all the other monkeys around us. That is what needs to be done." And so what that shows you, I mean, are you aware of that study at all?
I'm not aware of that study, though I do know a number of other studies that go in the same direction.
Oh, okay.
It's a great study. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's nurture, right? And then
Yeah.
one other question I have is, all right, so that's in the environment. People are like, okay, if you do that, then that's bad. I don't know
Yeah.
why it's bad, but everybody's told me it's bad. So, but
Yeah.
there's also something happening subconsciously, I think, that maybe gets passed down. What if there's a fear that is passed from generation to generation, and therefore that one action, that one constant repetition of do this, do this, do this,
Yeah.
it's just in you for life, and it's tough to get out. And maybe that's how a lot of people get stuck into ruts. So anything you could say in regards to whether it's nature versus nurture, what's more powerful? Can you break bad habits, bad patterns easily, or is it even possible?
No, you can break bad habits, but it can be hard. And first of all, you're right that it can be nurture. And it's amazing how even monkeys have very sophisticated social learning. So my son spent 6 months, he's an anthropologist. And when he was sort of earlier and as a student, he spent 6 months in Costa Rica studying capuchin monkeys. And capuchin monkeys are amazing. They have this whole kind of soap opera lifestyle that you can go into a group of capuchin monkeys, and you can figure out who's the bully, who's the faithful guy, who's the person you can't trust, and they have a rich social life. But the important point is they learn from their elders, and they learn from their elders sometimes when the elders don't even know why they're doing things. So they did experiments in which they introduced these monkeys to new fruits which they'd never seen before, but which some of the older monkeys had seen, and they showed how the younger ones would try and figure out who they should copy in terms of how to figure out the fruit. And they wanted to know, are they copying just the high status monkeys, or are they copying the monkeys who are actually good at dealing with the fruits? And so it turned out that there's just this huge, rich array of social learning in capuchin monkeys. And humans are like, to the power of 10, that we just learn so much more from other people. So a lot of it is nurture, but there almost certainly is nature too. And that doesn't necessarily mean genes, because now there's a whole science of what they call epigenetics, which shows that, for example, very traumatic events which happen to people in one generation can actually change. It's by a process they call methylation of the genes, that doesn't change their genome, but it changes which genes are expressed in their behavior and in their physiology. And so you can actually pass down to your children the memory of a trauma that you've had as a child. It doesn't go through your genes, but it goes through the methylation, which expresses which of your genes are expressed. And so you can see, for example, children in a generation that has not been traumatized can react towards traumatic events and traumatic things in a way that seems to depend on the memory of what happened to their parents. Now, it's still a part of the science that's really cutting edge. It's really frontier. We don't quite know what to make of it, but it's very interesting, and it shows that yes, there's some real persistence from one generation to another in things like traumas and things like bad habits and so on. But it's still a social process. We can free ourselves from the tyranny of these bad habits and these traumas in the past. But you shouldn't underestimate the challenge. And again, it's a challenge that we meet much better if we do it collectively and if we're lucid about it. If you just try and think by myself, I'm going to think myself into being more reasonable or less traumatized or whatever, you're not going to do that. You need other people. It's a team process, but other people can help you.
Wow. Yeah, so being aware of it is step one, but that's what people call generational curses, right? There's certain things that people are addicted to, whether it's a substance or a certain lifestyle, and it's real. What you're saying is that there are studies that show things get passed on, not through your genes, but maybe through something else. That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And you did bring up that how, I mean, I guess all animals are to some extent, but humans are very social creatures. And I heard about a study recently, and maybe this is something that's been going on for a long time, but when it comes to how monkeys, I just love talking about it because it makes so much sense in today's world. But when it comes to monkeys and how they congregate and work together, I always thought the most dominant monkey becomes the alpha. And on a short time frame, that is the case. But if that monkey who's dominant is like a tyrant and hurts other monkeys, as soon as that monkey gets cornered by multiple other monkeys, that tyrant dies. And so
Yeah.
what it shows is that you can succeed at a very high level by treating people like garbage, but it's on a short time frame. As time goes on and there's enough people around you, you will get crushed. So the answer, and this is what they've shown in the other study, is that the monkey who is able to be friendly with all the different other monkeys and still add value, but also still have dominance, still have the ability to fight back, that's the one that usually stays in power the longest. That's the alpha. So is there anything that you've come across that might be relevant for our audience in
Absolutely.
regards to
I
that?
think the study you may be referring to is a book called Hierarchy in the Forest by an anthropologist called Christopher Boehm. And it's basically comparing the chimpanzee groups he studied with human groups. And what he says is that some chimps are very good at getting together, even if they're not the dominants in their group. They can get together and collude to act against an otherwise dominant male that's abusing his power. Okay, and it almost always is his because in those groups it's almost always the males who are physically stronger who are able to do that. And what Christopher Byrne says is this is impressive when you see it in chimps, but it's spectacularly more impressive when you see it in humans because one of the things that humans really have the ability to do is to form coalitions. And we can form coalitions to ensure that single people, and again, they're usually, but not always males, who get above themselves, who think that they're, because they're the strongest or the toughest or the most good looking or the most successful, they can treat everybody else like garbage. They quickly provoke something that is a combination of an instinctive reaction. We don't like that. And also a kind of strategic calculation, which is there's nothing we can do against this person who's abusing their power if we do it alone. But if we act together, we are stronger than they are. And that's something that human groups are very good at doing, and even better at doing than chimps. So I suspect that I don't know whether it was that particular study, but that's one of the ones that. And you may also know that Frans de Waal, I don't know if you've had him on your podcast, but
No.
he sadly passed away recently. He was somebody who he wrote a book called Chimpanzee Politics in the early 1980s, which was just a classic. And I mean, title tells you everything. It's about how do chimps construct coalitions and so on. And it's kind of scary in the world of chimp politics because it's very violent and because the coalitions are turning over the whole time. But it's also kind of hopeful because what he says is that many of the skills that you need to try and get some stability in a very dangerous world are the skills of empathy, compassion, understanding for others. It's not the case. You might think evolution means that we should all be the toughest and the nastiest and so on. It's not true. Together, by sort of activating our powers of empathy and understanding, we can actually do far more than we can do alone.
Mm. Man, I could talk to you for hours, but before I wrap up for today, I have to ask you about your other book called The War of the Sexes: How Conflict and Cooperation Have Shaped Men and Women from Prehistory to Present. And one thing that I've researched is that there is a difference between how or what men value as compared to what women value. And obviously, when it comes to the mate, but also to life in general. One thing that is common is that men are more interested in things women are more interested in people. And I don't know if that's across the board, but I know that it's something I came across. So, what is, I mean, you could probably go into crazy detail, but what is maybe some of the significant differences between men and women, if you can
Ah,
elaborate on?
huge question. And first of all, the thing to remember is the differences we find are only differences in averages. Okay, so across the whole range of behavioral characteristics, there are men at one end of the range and women at one end of the range. There are women at the other end of the range and men at the other end of the range. And so you'll always find, for any characteristic, you'll always find women who are more, as it were, male than the average male, and you'll find men that are more female than the average female. And so you should never get into a stereotype vision where you think all men are like this or all women are like that. So that's the first thing to say. But yes, there are some differences. And the other thing to emphasize is that you can't scale over all of those differences and say men are just better overall at this or women are just better overall at that. So if you take one of the most controversial areas, which is intelligence, there are lots of particular tasks you can find that men are better at than women. So take an example. If you do a test where you rotate a physical object and you take photos of the physical object and you ask people, is that the same physical object viewed from this angle as the other one? On average, men score better on that test. Okay. If you do different tests, which is guessing what emotions people are expressing through their eyes, on average, women do better than that. If you try to say, well, okay, so who's smarter, men or women? It's a stupid question. It's a
Hmm.
really dumb question because who's to say, is it more important in life to know how to look at objects, or is it, well, it depends. If you're an architect, it probably is. Is it more important to, tell people's emotions in the eyes? Well, if you're an HR manager, it probably is. And, it's not that surprising that there are probably more men in architecture and more women in HR. But if it's if you're saying who's smarter overall, the question is just meaningless because there are so many different things that we're all good at, and there's no such thing as being smarter overall.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, and I've come across a few studies that show that, there are skill sets automatically within, men or women. And whether it comes down to, I know how gut instinct, women have this, especially a mother's intuition, they say. There is something about women having an intuition that might be a little bit faster. And I'm telling you, it probably is biologically put there in place because women have to be way more selective of who they mate with, right? When it comes to having kids and being susceptible to certain diseases, I think there's an intuition that's built within them that maybe men do not have or they struggle with. So I'm fascinated by the differences. And you talk a little bit about that there's a rising conflict potentially because of how we view life. I look at maybe the increase in divorce rate based off of two things. Number one, religion is going out the window in America, especially, but also potentially hierarchies are changing. Women are less dependent on men. And then also, what's your role? Is a man's role now still to go out and hunt while the woman still takes care of the house, or is it flipped? I think many people are conflicted by what is my role anymore. So am I onto something? Is that why maybe there's a rising conflict?
Absolutely. And so no, I think you put your finger on something really important. It's not just rising divorce rates, but it's also rising rates of people who don't want to get married in the first place. And in some sense, what's going on is that the more we talk about and the more we reflect about what we want out of life, and your podcast is a great way of doing this. And I think you do a great service to the world in general by helping us all to be more reflective. But the more reflective we are, the higher our standards are, and the more likely we are to think, well, why should I put up with this relationship? I mean, it may not be a marital relationship, it could be a work relationship, it could be whatever. We may think to ourselves, why should I put up with this mediocre relationship since I've been able to reflect on how much more I can get out of life? Now, being able in our brains and in our imaginations to have a much richer life that we could potentially have can also make us a bit intolerant of the messy, ordinary, not very functional relationships we have in the real world. And I think that the real challenge for us is to be more lucid about what's possible, but also a bit more tolerant, a bit more sort of laid back, and a bit more empathetic about the messy stuff of ordinary life. We can better imagine how we could perfect ourselves, but we don't want to start looking at our work colleagues, our life partners, our parents, our siblings, etc., and thinking to ourselves, well, actually, by this new higher standard, these people are imperfect. That way is the way to be unhappy. So it's a really difficult thing. It's sort of press yourself through the use of your imagination to reach higher, go faster, be more ambitious, but at the same time be more tolerant of what we see around us. And again, it's about teamwork because you may be more ambitious about what you can do by yourself, but you have to take the team with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does correlate with the other books very well that, right. It's a partnership and there's got to be a give and take. There's an exchange, but everybody plays their role. I think that's significant. Guys, his book, he has multiple books, but the one that we talked about mostly on this podcast is called The Company of Strangers, A Natural History of Economic Life. He also has another book out there and it's called The War of the Sexes. And, yeah, The War of the Sexes. I don't see a subtitle. Is the subtitle? Yeah, How Conflict and Cooperation Have Shaped Men and Women from Prehistory to the Present. I think that's your first book. Is that right?
No, the first one is The Company of Strangers.
Oh, okay. And then
And
you also
don't
have
forget
the
to
other
tell
one,
them,
The Divine Economy.
don't forget to tell them about that because that is published today. And
Oh,
you're the first people I've talked to about it. So it's out
wait a
today.
second. All right. It's a number one new release right now. But he got the tag. You see it? It's there. So check out it. Paul Seabright's book, The Divine Economy: How Religious Compete for Wealth, Power, and People. And if they pick this book up, what will they see or what will they learn? If there's any quick little takeaway for it.
Well, they'll learn that, religions are many things. They're sources of inspiration and so on, but they're also businesses and legitimately so. And they're legitimate businesses. I describe their business models, how they succeed, how they fail. And I also say that we should treat them as businesses in the sense that we should consider them legitimate, but at the same time, we should expect them to be responsible in the way that we expect ordinary businesses to be responsible.
Wow. Now, I don't know if this is still the case, but the Catholic Church was the biggest organization in the world, I heard at one
Yeah.
point. Is it still to this day?
It's not as big as Facebook, but it's getting there. It has 1.3 billion members. And the really interesting thing, if you've got 2 more seconds,
Yeah, of course.
is that people think that Catholic Church is incredibly hierarchical. And it has lots of hierarchies of status. There's lots of different kind of robes and things you can put on in the Catholic Church. But the really interesting thing about the Catholic Church is it has an incredibly flat hierarchy. It basically has the ordinary worshiper, the priest, the bishop, and the pope, and that's it. And what does that mean? That means that from the start, the pope has been able to sort of say what they like, but in practice, they've had to allow the different parts of the Catholic Church and the different countries and the different orders and so on to live and let live. And so, the Pope doesn't have the bandwidth to oversee everything. The bishops don't have the bandwidth to oversee all the priests. The priests don't have the bandwidth to oversee everything that the faithful are getting up to. And when we hear, as of course we've heard recently, about things like terrible sexual abuse inside the Catholic Church, it's always been like that. We're learning about it more, thanks actually in large part to social media. And I think we have to understand that this is a terrible thing, but we also need to understand that it's partly the result of a structure which never ever had the bandwidth to patrol and oversee everything that was going on. It always was limited to kind of hoping that people would behave responsibly, but never really having the ability to police what they did. And so in thinking about lots of people quite rightly want to speak up on behalf of victims. They want to highlight the terrible suffering and so on, and that's right. But I, as somebody who's interested in organization, I want to put my skills to thinking about how can we restructure the organizations in such a way that these things are less likely to happen.
Wow. It's number one new release right now. Just came out today, May 14th. This is awesome. We never get to talk to somebody whose book is just coming out. So fascinating. I think it's 487 pages on Kindle. It's a very content-rich book, it looks like. Wow.
Well,
Well
thank you.
done.
I'm very happy to talk to you about it first.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, check out his book. And I'm a Christian. I was raised a Catholic my whole life. And in 2012, 2013, I was dead broke. And I remember them asking for money constantly and constantly every week. And I just was like burned out by it. But when I went to a non-denominational church where it didn't feel as structured, I became closer to God for the very first time. I felt like a relationship. And I realized I had the outside perspective of seeing how much of a business the Catholic Church really is. And like you said, they kind of have to do things in a business sense every step of the way. So I didn't like that aspect. I really liked just being closer to God in general, just the relationship. So I'm gonna check this book out. Guys, the book is called The Divine Economy: How Religions Compete for Wealth, Power, and People. And Paul Seabright, I'm telling you, you got to come back on. I think I could talk to you for a couple more hours without any problem.
Well, I think you've just disproved this point about women being more intuitive and empathetic. I think you're obviously a very intuitive and empathetic guy.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah. Still, my mom always had an intuition that far exceeded anything of mine. Hey, I would watch out for that. Don't do that. No, mom, I got it. She knew better. So, thanks so
We
much.
all have a lot to thank our mothers for, and my book is dedicated to my mother who passed away last year. So
Wow, my mom did too. Mine was day after Mother's Day. She passed
right,
away.
mine was June 28th.
Wow. So you're going through the same thing as me this past day.
Yeah, you only have one mother.
Yeah,
They're
man, I'm with you.
irreplaceable.
So, prayers and condolences, man. So,
Thank you.
I really appreciate you coming on, dedicating this book to your mom. That's awesome. And let's stay in touch because I think you have a lot of valuable insight that would be very valuable for my audience for a very long time. So, thanks so
Thank you,
much,
Mike.
man.
It's great talking to you.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million